mention of anything is really important, and the first mention of a battle is significant, and it's going to be with Abraham and his friend and his 318 trained servants, which the idea of dedicated servants, apparently they would be those who have grown up in his household, so they could be the children of slaves that he had. Could be, I mean, there's various explanations for who they are, but people that certainly are serving him. And the fact that they're trained, and there's 318 of them, suggests that Abraham's a pretty big man in terms of his, his wealth and position, because if there is that number of men, then there's probably other women that are there and other kinds of servants along the way. So he's almost a little nation, a little city, and he is going to fight this battle, and he's going to go and rescue his nephew Lot, who got himself into trouble. If Lot would not have decided to go live in Sodom, he would not have been there when these 4 kings came from the Mesopotamia area. Mesopotamia, the word literally means between the river. Potamos is the word for river. Potomac in Washington literally is the river, which is a funny name for it. And so Meso means in the middle. Mesopotamia would be the land in between the Euphrates River and the other rivers that are over there. And they came down and they decided that they were going to plague the city-states that are in southern Israel, southern Canaan, I should call it, at this time. And so Abram, what he's going to do, I'm just going to give you a brief summary. He's going to say, well, I'm not going to put up with that. And he's going to go fight a confederacy of the most powerful nations in the world. That's probably one of the things that you should catch out of this, is that these are not small potatoes people. They're not city-states. They're big nations, and through guerrilla warfare, probably, through sneaking up with them, behind them at night, through coming in from various places, he rescues Lot, and God gives him the day. Of course, it's the plan of God, and so he comes back home, and he meets 2 different kings. One of them is the king of Sodom, who doesn't show much graciousness and thankfulness at all. And then he meets the king of Salem, whose name is Melchizedek. And we won't talk very much about Melchizedek this week. I want to talk next week about Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, the king of peace. Many people have suggested that maybe he is a pre-incarnate visitation of Jesus Christ. It's not a bad view. I don't think that is exactly the best view. I think that what he is a type of Christ, a human person, and we'll talk about some of those things next week. But another first that happens in this chapter is the idea that Abraham pays tithes to Melchizedek. And so we see this idea of giving to the Lord, giving in honor of the Lord, if you will, giving, to those who represent the Lord as one of the responsibilities of God's people in terms of expressing gratitude to the Lord. So let's go ahead and read. That was the summary. Now we'll look at it a little bit and work through it. Genesis 14, verse 1, and it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, the king of Shinar. Anybody remember what Shinar is? Shinar is literally just another word for Babylon, the area of Babel. Where did Abraham come from, by the way? From Ur, around Babylon. The Tower of Babel started there. So the fact that he is from Babel or Babylon, and this is Shinar, tells us that he's no small potatoes. He's a big fella. Arioch, king of El-Asar, Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and Tidal, king of the Goyim. The word nations is the word for Gentiles, king of the Gentiles. We don't really know where that is. It's up in the Hittite area, Turkey today. That they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Sinab, king of Admah, Shember, king of Zebulun, and the kings of Bala, that is in Zor, that's south of Sodom and Gomorrah, I believe. And all these joined together in the valley of Siddim, that is in the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, he is a Persian, by the way, and in the 13th year they rebelled. So if you're not going to pay tribute and tithe, or whatever, tribute's a better word, to the king, they're going to come and punish you. They're going to take you away or kidnap your children to get your attention, to make sure that you pay the tribute that you should next year. And so notice what happened between verse 4 and 5. It took them a whole year to put together a response. So in the 14th year, so we lost a year there. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and attacked a group of people. Before I read the names, if it took them a whole year to get down south and to assemble an army and make a game plan, you know, again, that we're not talking just about a few people. These are not a bunch of Boy Scouts coming down. And so as they're coming down, they do what a lot of armies do. They tend to create havoc in their path. So if you're going south, and I don't know if you remember this about the Crusades, but when they were heading from England and Europe into Jerusalem, every city they would pass, they'd say, hey, that looks like a good city. And they would go in and they would raid it and take everything they wanted. So this is what they're doing as they're going south. They're taking no prisoners. And so here's what they do. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer, verse 5, they were with them. They came and they attacked Raphaim. So Raphaim didn't do anything to them, but they attacked them. In Ashtaroth and Karanim and Zuzim in Ham and Emim in Shavak Kiriathaim. And the Horites in their mountain of Seir as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and attacked the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who dwell in Hazazon Tamar, and the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of Admah and the king of Zebolim and the king of Bela, that is Zor, and they went out and joined together in battle in the valley of Siddim. So in other words, the fact that they're able to take city-state after city-state after city-state, multiple nations, tells us that they're pretty powerful and they're actually gaining in power. One of the things that happened during the Civil War is when Sherman was down around Atlanta, Georgia, they figured out that if you just turned the army loose as they raided places and farms and land as they would go, they got actually stronger. You know, rather than needing supplies to be brought up, that it would increase their ability to fight. And so these are the kinds of things that are happening here with this group of kings. And so it says here, verse 9, against Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and Tidal, king of the nations, and Amraphel, the king of Shinar, and Arioch, the king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. So we now have a battle of 9 different kings. Now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and some fell there, and that remainder fled into the mountains, and they took of all of the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all of their provisions, and they went their way. So they've had enough. Time to go back home. They can't even hardly carry all the goods that they have. And so they also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he had dwelt by the terebinth tree of Mamre. Remember, the trees are really important again. So he's down there. This is a witness tree, if you will, a tree that's been around for a long time, and it certainly is a landmark. The Amorite, the brother of Ishkol and the brother of Abner, and they were allies with Abram. Now Abram, when he heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house, and they went in pursuit as far as Dan. So he's traveled about 100 miles so far. From Hebron to Dan is about 100 miles, so he's rushing up there with his soldiers, and they're going to catch up to them here. And when they do catch up to them, they're going to keep chasing them for 50 miles. So he divided his forces, verse 15, against them by night, he and his servants, and they attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So that's the extra 50 miles that they're chasing them in the dark. And so he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. And then he meets the king of Sodom, verse 17. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shavah, that is the king's valley, so that's close to Jerusalem, though Jerusalem doesn't have that name yet. And his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him. And then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, because he was the priest of the Most High God, and he blessed him, and he said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the God of the Most High who delivered you delivered your enemies into your hand, and he gave him tithe of all. Just a few thoughts, and then we'll kind of go back to the beginning. I'll have some panels that we'll look at from the PowerPoint this morning. What a mysterious figure is Melchizedek. And because he's so mysterious, because we don't know where he came from, we don't know where he went, we don't know how long he served, he comes without any kind of genealogy. He serves as a perfect type of Christ, but he's also a reminder of a hidden, maybe a dark veil that's over our understanding of the nations of the world during the time of Abraham. And what I mean by that is we tend to think that the only person who knew the Lord during the time of Abraham would have been Abram and his family. But the Bible actually speaks about other people and other lands that have a knowledge of God. So about the same time as Melchizedek, there's somebody that we know who's pretty famous, and his name is Job. Yeah, and Job knows a ton of stuff about God. Job knows the Lord personally. And then Job has 3 friends that came from other areas. Remember, they came in to visit him. And as they're visiting him, they know the Lord too. Not in the same way, but they have a true relationship with the Lord, it seems like. Maybe less mature than Job's, but they know the Lord. And so because of that, you have people like Moses' father-in-law, whose name is Jethro. He seems to know the Lord. You have even Balaam, who is the prophet. He's not much of a prophet, but he seems to have some kind of knowledge of the Lord also. And so the fact that there are these people who have a relationship with the Lord and the scriptures tell us nothing about them, how do they know the Lord and anything like that, that really doesn't surprise us. And so we should be able to think and say that, well, when we get to heaven, that there will be nations of people and individuals that lived during this time that we would have had no idea had a saving relationship with the Lord, and they do. And frankly, I'm grateful for that, and that is the case. And so Melchizedek is one of those persons this morning. So a few things about what we're looking at in Genesis chapter 14. It's the triumph of the servant of God over worldwide empires. This chapter really is about the test of faith for Abraham. Abraham is being tested again. Almost everything you'll notice about the life of Abraham is the fact that God is testing him. His tests get bigger along the way. And so here's Abraham minding his own business, and he sent, Lot down south and all of that. And he didn't get involved in the war. He didn't run over and try and stop Chedorlaomer from coming through the land until it was personal. And once it was personal, then he got involved. And frankly, we could say something about the idea of just war. Is it ever right to go to war for any reason? So Abram doesn't go to war to try and get goods and get booty from the other nations, but when someone is involved with him that is being hurt, then he steps right in, and he doesn't go and collect a lot of things, but he goes and rescues the people. So here's Abraham and his journey. You can see the Tower of Babel, Ur-Radu, if you remember the name, one of the smaller regions south of Ur of the Chaldees around Babylon, is probably the present location of the Tower of Babel. We're pretty certain about that. And when you're traveling from Ur of the Chaldees in between the 2 rivers, you have to always go north because you couldn't go through the middle of the desert. So it's a 550-mile journey from here over to here. It would be, probably 300 if you could go as the crow flies. But if you tried to go as a crow fly, you wouldn't make it. You'd die in the wilderness. So that's where they go. And frankly, it's really significant that the people that Abram is fighting are people from his hometown region, or his local area. And so they come over and deal with them. So here's the names of the people. These 4 kings against 5. This first guy is from Shinar, and Shinar is just Babylon. So that's where he came from. Babylon is one of the oldest cities in the world. The second of the cities is Arioch of Eleazar, and this is modern-day Turkey. So we think of the Hittite Empire. The Hittites were a huge group of people. We know more about them than we ever have, but very significant. Again, no small potatoes. They're empires and not just city-states. Chedorlaomer of Elam, this would be over to the, if you're looking at the map, to the east of Babel. And so this would be Iran or Susa. Anybody remember what Susa is? Interesting name used later in the Bible. Susa is where Esther ended up in the palace when she was taken over, and after the Medes and the Persians took over from Babylon. So that's the east there. And then they have Tidal, king of the nations, who was part of the Hittite Empire. And so this is the group on our side, those who came down from the south. And then this is the group of people that they attack. I won't even bother really mentioning Bera and Bersh and Shanah and Shemaber, and then the king of Bela, his name is not even mentioned. And these four nations are going to whip the five really with no difficulty. So the four kings came and they attacked the other group, the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Emim, the Horites, the Amalekites, the Amorites, before returning to the five kings and punishing them for their rebellion. So frankly, they've been, just clearing the whole land all over the place. They're kind of like a bunch of Alexander the Great's kind of people along the way. And so this is what it would have looked like. Here's the lamb. This would be Iran today, Susa, Persia. This is Babylon. This is the two rivers. Then this is the Hittite Empire. This would be Turkey up in here. And so they go up. I'll give you a map here. It shows it. I'm going to skip some of those things. Basically, it's just giving you the idea that they were a great group of nations. So they come down to the south and they go to down what is known as the King's Highway. King's Highway would be the place in which empires would travel, very famous. And so if you lived along there, you could, collect taxes, things like that, and it would be great. They wipe out all these nation states, city-states, and then they finally get down. They go south of the Dead Sea. This is the Sea of Galilee here. This is the Dead Sea to the south, and then they wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah, which even until today, we don't really know where Sodom and Gomorrah is. There's some pretty good ideas. People guess, and they make their suggestions. They look for salt because Lot's wife turned to salt, and, maybe that was the case. And so they basically steamroll over the whole area, and then they head back home. So here they come. They come down in. They, defeat. They rob and pillar, rape, things like that, and then they head north. And then here's Abram. He's over here in Hebron, sitting beside the tree of Mamre, which is in Hebron. And then he recognizes what happened with his nephew, and he chases them all the way up to Dan, and he meets them in about the region of Dan, which is as far north as you go in Israel, in Canaan. And then he chases them for another 50 miles, which frankly is quite a feat. It's really significant that he and 318 individuals were able to do exactly that. Another view of the same map, you kind of can see where they went along the way. Another view, basically they came down on the east side of the Jordan River, went underneath, then came back up on the west side of the river itself. And so the plan of Abram is rather significant. He does a surprise attack. He sneaks up behind, does it at night, and is completely successful. And we should ask the question, well, why was he so successful? Well, because he's, a seasoned warrior, right? Because he has these 318 trained men. Well, when he meets Melchizedek and he gives praise, who does he say gave him the victory? It's El Elyon. It's the blessing of God. And we should stop right now and make sure that we understand, as impressive as the defeat that Abraham puts on them, it was the hand of God. Clearly the hand of God in watching over him, delivering him, because God made a promise to Abram, which was, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, and in you all the families of the earth will find their blessing. And so this is just another example and a test of the idea, will God take care of Abram? And of course he will. And so that's what happens. And so he pursues them for 100 miles, and then he pursues them another 50 miles. You got to wonder what was going through their mind, because you're sitting there dark and you think, we've wiped out every city-state we could think of. There's nobody left that can come and beat us. And all of a sudden, under the cover of darkness, the arrows start flying and the shields start banging, and the shields and the swords are swinging, and people are dropping dead. And so they probably drop everything and ran as they were going. And so they go by and they meet with Melchizedek. So what's the purpose of the first war in the Bible? There's a few significant purposes that are there. The first one is to show that God is going to protect Abraham, as he made a promise to him and does exactly that. It also highlights the courage of Abraham, that there are times to fight. There are times to stand and take courage, and even though we want to be peaceful, and I'm sure Abraham wanted to be peaceful, and he was just a pilgrim, trying to stay out of other people's business, that once his family was involved, he needed to step in and do something. And that really gives us an example of the idea of just war. And so Abraham faces this test this morning that we're looking at, and Abraham acts on faith, and God blesses his courage in significant ways and in wonderful ways. And then we learn the third thing, that, well, if Lot would have been minding his own business and would have been in a different place other than Sodom and Gomorrah, he would not have been in trouble and had that difficulty either. And so one of the lessons is for us this morning, don't be a Lot. Don't live in the world. There is nothing like the world to play with your head. It absolutely does that. Messes with your mind. It messes with your morals. It messes with your understanding of what's true. And that's exactly what happens with Lot. And when you look at Lot, we'll be looking at him in chapter 19 and into chapter 20. It's pretty interesting that it seems like he has some married children and he has some single children. So he's going to leave town with 2 single girls, young ladies, and the rest of the family stays behind. The ones who stay behind, they don't believe in God, and he loses them in the fire and brimstone. He loses his own wife because she longs for Sodom and Gomorrah rather than to live with Lot out in the desert. And so basically, even though he thought it would be a good place to live, he loses virtually everything along the way. And so the Bible is real, and this is the one that I think is really worth thinking about for just a minute. When we look at these names here, why did Moses put names in there? Why couldn't he just say there's a bunch of people that came and a bunch of people that came? But he lists name after name after name after name, and most of those we don't even know who they are. So in history, I read book after book about it, and they said, no, we don't know where he's from. We've never heard of this person before. But all of the names are very indicative of Babylonian names. They're indicative of Hittite names. And the point is they absolutely have to be history. That this is, again, history. Remember we said earlier, all through the book of Genesis, that it's as if someone is just simply writing down a history book and recording it. This is another example of the fact that one of the things Moses was interested in was what? Moses was interested in military history. Does that surprise you? What was Moses like when he was in Egypt? Well, we know that he was a military commander. It's one of the things that Moses did. He went out and he worked for King Pharaoh and delivered them. And so the Israelites, when they're coming into the land and they're reading about these names, they're going to know these people. Just because we don't know them doesn't mean that they didn't know them. They would have known them, and they would have said, wow, that is absolutely amazing that the Lord has so thoroughly and completely and wonderfully protected Abraham and Lot at this time. So the invaders are a powerful force, again, known by the scripture readers. That would be the children of Israel when they came out of Egypt, even if we don't. And so Abraham, therefore, learned to trust in God. And the God of Abraham, it proves that he is mightier than the nations. A couple things to think about when you look at the map here. When they circle around and they come to the south, it's rather significant that they wipe out all of these different kingdoms here. They come all the way this far down, and it seems like they just got tired of traveling. Okay, we don't have any more energy to kill and maim anybody. Let's go home, and that is exactly what they did. The campaign, just a few things about it. As Abraham was there living in the world, of course, he does evaluate or establish the idea of just war. And I think, we don't talk a lot about just war, but there are times in which it's appropriate for people to go to war, to defend. I don't think every war that we fought in time has been a just war, but some of them were, and we ought to be thankful for that. 3 factors in Abraham's military strategy that are significant. His 318 trained men. The word trained here is a fascinating word. It's the word Hanak, and we get the word Hanukkah from it. So Hanukkah is the time in Israel's history in which, when they recaptured the land of Israel, they didn't have enough dedicated oil. And so for 7 days, as they were purifying oil and getting it ready to go, there was this oil that, for some miraculous reason, it burned for 7 days without running out. And so they call that the time of dedication, or Hanak. And that means that it was that devoted to that one thing. This word is used in Proverbs 22:7. And in Proverbs 22:7, it says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he won't depart from it. And the word for train up literally means to dedicate. The same word. Is an interesting phrase. And it might mean either to push your child in a direction, or it might mean if you let them go in a direction, then they will go that way for the rest of their lives. But these men were trained, and so that tells me that in Abraham's household there had to be, could we say 1,000 people? Probably, maybe a couple of thousand. Certainly a lot of people would have been there in his family. How do you feed 1,000 people every day? I mean, how many sheep do you need? How many camels? How many, acres of crops, barley, wheat, things like that would you need to be able to feed them? He fed them all and took care of them all. And so that was a rather significant thing. And God has clearly blessed Abram in a significant way. He's very cunning, of course, in his military. And then thirdly, he's going to give all the credit to God. And I want to go ahead and look now at the blessing, because that's significant for today. And then next week, we'll go ahead and talk about who this person is. Genesis 14, verse 19. When he met him, and then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was priest of the Most High God. So they're going to have something like a communion service of sorts. They're going to have a time of fellowship. Remember, one of the things we said about the communion time, our communion time, when we gather together, is a means for us to have fellowship with God. Because they always viewed it that when you came to the Lord's table, you were actually having a meal with the God that you worship. That's what you see in 1 Corinthians when Paul is talking to the church. He says, now if you go in and you eat meat that's offered to idols, what are you doing? You're having supper with demons. Because behind every idol there is a demon. And so if you go to a festival in honor of a demon, the demon is there, the idol is there, and you're having fellowship with them. In the same way, when we come to the Lord's table, we're having fellowship with the Lord. And not to say that the bread turns into anything other than bread, or to say that the wine turns into anything other than the wine. It doesn't. But we're having fellowship with the Lord at that time. And so the fellowship that was happening, verses 18 and 19 are significant, because clearly this man has a relationship with the Most High God. And he is a prophet, this Melchizedek is. He's a priest of the Most High God, and he blesses Abram. And he says, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. And so all of a sudden, just out of the blue, we learn that there are people who know the Lord that we had no idea they had a relationship with him. Now, I think that there's a modern day application for what we're talking about here, in the fact that there was this believer that we didn't know anything about. And I think the modern day application is we should probably be more careful and more charitable about who we think is going to heaven and who isn't. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, I know the gospel is the only way you get to heaven is by believing in Christ alone, and that's really significant. But we're awfully judgmental and just assuming, like when we go to heaven that that's just the Baptists are going to be there. There's jokes about that all the time, or other groups of people. But God does things in ways that we don't always understand, and in places we don't always understand. And this is an example of that in Abram's day there were other believers that we weren't told anything about. And the same thing is likely true in our world today. Can a person ever get to heaven? And please don't think I'm saying you get to heaven without believing in Jesus. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that God works in ways that are probably beyond our understanding, and that certainly is the case there. And so the last thing we see is in verse 20, and it is simply that he gave him tithes of all. Who gave who tithes? Because of the two pronouns, you could be tempted to say it could have gone one way or the other. But it's Abram who's giving tithes to Melchizedek, who is the king and the priest of Salem. And the significance of this is often people have said, well, the idea of tithing is established in the law of Moses. But the law of Moses won't be given for another 400 years, right? Another 450 years actually before the law of Moses is given. And so the principle of giving a portion to the Lord was something that was established way back then. And so let's ask a question and try and answer it for a second. Where did Abram get the idea that he ought to give a tithe of his money to this representative of the Lord? Start the Jeopardy music. Do, 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 do. And you don't have to answer it with a question, by the way. We don't know. Maybe it's just in the heart of mankind to know that we ought to give back to God. So, yeah, go ahead, Gary. I'm interested in any thoughts.
Could this whole event here be a major part of the founding of the nation of Israel?
Sure.
Of faith. Abraham knew he was going to be that foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And could this be a really important part of it? I never thought about that before. Maybe the tithe, God himself sent his.
The whole, are you saying, and I'll throw it back to you as soon as I rephrase this, are you saying that the Lord knew or knows that we need ways to express our gratitude in tangible ways?
No, what I'm saying is that was this event a turning point in the establishment of the nation of Israel?
Mm-hmm.
And that God chose this time and place to show his power to all these nations. They must have known that 218 men couldn't defeat an army like
Right, right.
miraculously shook them up. And I think I tend to think that Melchizedek was it theophany? Who knows?
Right. Well, we're going to talk a whole bunch about Melchizedek next week and talk about the both sides of the coin, what could be there in terms of who he is. So it certainly is establishing something significant about the people of God in the land of Israel, for sure.
It's a fascinating picture you're painting here today.
It really is, yeah. So if I could just show my cards just a little bit about why I think that he's a type of Christ rather than actually Christ. I mean, a lot of us are probably thinking about that. It's because if he was an actual Christ who was there in a theophany, pre-incarnate Christ, then you would have God incarnate having come to the earth before the time of Christ, before he was born, and he would be reigning over a pagan city. So the Jebus city, which is Jerusalem, is a pagan city, even though he's king there. And if you would have Christ reigning over a pagan city, then why didn't he change it or fix it, or why wasn't there any other records of any influence of the second member of the Trinity reigning there? So I had to say not possible, but it just seems it's quite a stretch to think that Christ could be there reigning over a city filled with idols, and it would have continued that way until later. And the true significance of this city is it won't be conquered as a Canaanite city, Jerusalem. It's not conquered by Joshua. And rather than, Joshua coming in and taking over like he did everywhere else, it's conquered by somebody else. You remember who conquered Jerusalem? David did. And so the significance is going to connect the throne of David with the throne of Melchizedek, which connects the throne of Melchizedek with the throne of Christ. And so there's a really unique interchange there between all of those. David is the one who conquers the city that belonged to Melchizedek, therefore making the Davidic kingdom a Melchizedekian kingdom of sorts. And it gives us more insight into who is Jesus. So anyway, we'll talk about those things next week and the significance of it. And the reason that it's so significant is almost every time that a young man is being ordained into the ministry, when they go through the process, that someone likes to throw out this question, which is, tell us the significance of Melchizedek in the Bible. And people laugh at it as if it doesn't have a good answer. But the truth is, it has multiple wonderful answers that are really significant about who Melchizedek is and what he has to say about Jesus. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's more profound than I could understand, you could understand, but it certainly is worth thinking about. So today is kind of the introduction to what God is doing through the meeting between Abram and Melchizedek. So, any other questions? We'll call it good for today, and next week you can all come prepared to learn the question: what's the significance of the Melchizedekian priesthood in the Bible? So, all right. Thank you, Lord, for this day and for your love for us. We thank you for the pictures and types and mysteries we see in the Old Testament. And we even thank you, Lord, for the faith of Abram as you delivered him and as he was victorious rescuing his nephew and as you again exalted your name and you received honor and glory from both Abraham and from Melchizedek and from all of those who were watching as they were learning and seeing that God can do things that all the nations of this world are not able to do. It reminds me of Psalm 2, why do the nations rage and the people imagine a vain thing? They exalt themselves against the Lord and against his anointed. And you demonstrated this day that you're more powerful than all the kings of the earth. Thank you for this time. I pray that you give us encouragement today. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.